yesterday's sermon, and you would not. I don't know if you've ever read those lovely texts about having peace and rest, and really nice promises that in returning and rest we'll be saved. And then there's always a negative few lines at the end, and you would not. That's what our message is about, those last few words, you would not. So that is the title if you're taking notes. So we're going to just look at a aspect of Christianity that people can easily get into. We're going to go through some biblical examples, some illustrations of those who did not, they would not, and understand what it is to do it. A few weeks ago, probably months ago perhaps, I was speaking with a minister from another church, and we were speaking about our church standards, beliefs, standards of living. And they also, like ourselves, were very conservative, had high standards. They have a prophet, we have a prophet, and the prophet that we have, Ellen White, has given a lot of detail on standards. The Bible gives a lot of detail on standards. Moses gave a lot of detail on standards. And also their prophet gave a lot of detail on standards. And we were speaking together, and we were just sharing different points of belief and Christian standards that we both believed in. And in our conversation, I brought up the Sabbath, and they didn't believe the Sabbath, and they asked me a question. And the question was, if someone doesn't keep the Sabbath, will they be lost? Have you ever had those questions where you have a standard, and someone would say, well, if you didn't do that standard, are you lost? It sort of puts you in a funny situation, like this standard is the source of our salvation. You get that mentality come across sometimes? And they had standards, and one of their standards was that they did not drink alcohol. Similar to us, we don't either. I asked them a question. I said, do you believe that if someone drinks alcohol, that they're lost? And the response was, yes. If you can't obey the prophet, how can you be saved? And is that true or not? Why will people be lost? Tell me that. Because of obedience or disobedience? Which one? Lost because of disobedience. It's interesting that if you do something wrong, you're lost. We spoke about the Garden of Eden, and he brought up, well, it was a piece of fruit. God says don't eat it. They did it, and they're lost. It's a small thing. It's not drinking alcohol. It's just a fruit, and you're lost. And so he asked me the question, if someone doesn't keep the Sabbath day, are they lost? And then he went on to explain some examples of reformers in the Dark Ages, who he believes, as well as we, that they will be saved, who yet never kept the Sabbath. To make the point that you may not be lost. But then I said, well, is there examples in the Bible where someone's drunk alcohol and not being lost? Of course. So does that mean we can drink alcohol and still be saved? Or is abstaining from alcohol the source of my salvation, or is keeping the Sabbath day the source of my salvation? And these things, we had a really nice conversation, very pleasant conversation actually. I respected the man, and we had a very nice time together. But it made me think, why are people lost? Because they fail to do something Why are people lost? Because if there is a standard, and to not achieve that standard is sin, then the wage of sin is death. So if I don't achieve a certain standard, I'm lost. Is that a good way to think about this? Is it natural to think like this? That I have to achieve certain things, otherwise I'm lost. I can give you 100 Bible texts that would show that unless you do this certain thing, you won't be saved. Or not do a certain thing. Thou shalt not. I'd like to read a text in 1 John chapter 5 and verse 16, and I believe that we will not be lost so much by not doing certain things or doing certain things in action, but that we will be lost depending on what we do with Jesus. Amen. And this takes all the legalism out of the question, yet still keeps a standard that Christ can accomplish in us. And I'll just remake my belief. My belief is that we will not be lost so much of what we do, but what we have done with Jesus. Amen. This will be the biggest element. Sorry, I'm looking up my hymn book for a Bible verse. I just put my hymn book away so I don't do that again. And the text is in 1 John chapter 5 and verse 16. 1 John chapter 5 and verse 16. And here it reads, If any man see his brother sin a sin which is not unto death, he shall ask, and he shall give him life for them that sin not unto death. There is a sin unto death. I do not say that you should pray for it. All unrighteousness is sin, and there is a sin not unto death. Does that text confuse you? Yes. Okay, it says, if you see a brother sin a sin not unto death, you pray for life for him. Now, why do you need to pray for life for somebody who has sinned a sin not unto death? It says, there is a sin unto death. I do not say that he shall pray for it. All unrighteousness is sin, and there is a sin not unto death. So here is two things. If someone sins a sin not unto death, you should pray for him. If there is a sin that is unto death, don't pray for him. So, these two types of sin, one needs life, does it not? All sin is unrighteousness. All unrighteousness is sin. And there is a sin not unto death. Now that seems to conflict with the Bible text that says the wages of sin is death. All unrighteousness is sin. And the wages of sin is death. Here we see that there is a sin that can receive life, even though you have committed the sin. There is a sin that you cannot receive life. And if you make a sin and then receive life, will you die? No. So the result is not death. But you still have to receive life. In other words, let's just make it simple. There is a sin that is acceptable within the plan of salvation, and there is a sin that's outside of the plan of salvation. And the classic example is the devil. The devil is not in the plan of salvation. Do we agree with that? That the atonement on the cross was not for the devil. Christ's blood that was shed was not for Satan, it was for mankind. Should we be praying for the devil's salvation? Yes or no? No. So there's two types of sin. One sin, because don't get it wrong, all sin is unrighteousness. All unrighteousness is sin. So we're not trying to say there is some sin that's acceptable to do and there is some sin that's unacceptable to do. No, all sin is unacceptable. But there is a style of sin or a type of sin that is eligible for salvation, life. And there is a type that isn't. Let's look in Numbers chapter 5 and verse 5. Numbers chapter 5 and verse 5. Numbers chapter 5 and verse 5. It's easy to get on in the mindset that if you do a sin, that's it, you're lost. And for that particular sin, you will have eternal death. And so that will make our religion looking at actions as the source of not being lost or ultimately being saved, making it a works-based religion. Then the other extreme is where you say, well, it doesn't matter if you sin, just live how you like, and you will still be saved anyway, as long as you have a mental confession to the existence of God and Jesus and a certain amount of doctrines. Numbers chapter 5 and verse 5, and the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, verse 6, Speak unto the children of Israel, when a man or woman shall commit any sin that men commit, to do a trespass against the Lord, and that person be guilty, then shall they confess their sin that they have done, and he shall recompense his trespass with the principal thereof, and add unto it the fifth part thereof, and give it unto him against whom he hath trespassed, and so on. And here is this restoration for sin. But notice the wording, if any man or woman shall commit a sin, any sin that men commit. It sort of gives a type of sin. Here the Lord is saying, Moses, these offerings, this whole sacrificial system, if anyone sins this type of sin that men commit, then here is the procedure to have it reconciled. Okay, let's turn to Hosea chapter 6, another Bible text. Hosea chapter 6. Hosea, just after Daniel. Hosea 6, and reading in verse 3. Hosea 6, and reading in verse 3. Sorry, verse 7. I wrote down verse 3. It's actually verse 7. Hosea 6 and verse 7. But they, like men, have transgressed the covenant. There have they dealt treacherously against me. See verse 6, like men. And if you have the marginal reading for verse 7 of chapter 6, Hosea chapter 6 and verse 7, and you look up the marginal reading, it says like Adam. They, like Adam, have transgressed. When Adam transgressed, was there a way of escape? Can Adam have eternal life? So, if Adam has eternal life, he transgressed. Although he transgressed, he made a sin. Was it unto death ultimately, or was it not? He received life. He received life. It says if you see a sin, if you see a man or brother sin a sin that is not unto death, this type of sin that's called not unto death, then you shall pray for life for him. He needs life. Why? Because he's going to die. But when he receives life, he doesn't have to die. Therefore, the sin becomes not unto death. There's a way of escape. So it's like Adam. like men. If anyone commits a sin, then they should receive the plan of salvation for it, and they won't die. 1 John chapter 3 and verse 8. Let's turn back to 1 John. 1 John chapter 3 and verse 8. He that committeth sin is of the devil. For the devil sinneth from the beginning. For this purpose the Son of God was manifest, that he might destroy the works of the devil. Whosoever is born of God doth not commit sin, for his seed remaineth in him, and he cannot sin because he is born of God. In this the children of God are manifest, and the children of the devil. Whosoever doth not righteousness is not of God, neither he that loveth not his brother. For this is the message that ye heard from the beginning, that we should love one another, not as Cain, who was of that wicked one, and slew his brother. And wherefore slew he him? Because his own works were evil, and his brothers were righteous. Here's an example of two brothers. I want to ask you a question. Did Abel sin? Was Abel a sinner? How do you know Abel was a sinner? He had to make a sacrifice. So Abel was a sinner. Was Cain a sinner? Okay, but here is a contrast between two people. Now, one is called he's of the devil and one is of God. One received pardon and one didn't. It says, not as Cain, using Cain as the example for someone who sins after the similitude of the devil. Why did Cain kill Abel? Why? It says it in the text. Because his brother was righteous. That's why. Now that is a different sort of sin than the sin that they obviously did to even make a sacrifice in the first place. Why does Satan hate Christ? Is it the same reason why Cain hates Abel? Because he's right. He's righteous. And the other's evil. And so you get this John paints this picture of these two types of sin. As a sin unto death, and there is a sin not unto death. And so when we're talking in the religious world, and we start to get down to these standards, and we start to put down parameters that if someone doesn't achieve this standard, they're going to be lost. Is that the correct way to look about it? Is that the healthy way to view religious standards? If someone doesn't do this particular thing, they're not going to be saved. How we need to be looking at it is how do they respond to Jesus? Because how people respond to Jesus will determine whether they are like Satan in hating righteousness itself because it's righteous and the other's wicked, or whether they are sinning like Adam sinned in a terrible situation, a struggle between his own way and God's way, and it was a struggle because he actually did want to do God's way, but he had this powerful way the other way, and he made his decision in this really awful situation. Like Adam, they sin. If a man sins a sin like men commit. But there is a sin after the similitude of a devil. And so I'd like to go through some Bible texts, especially in the Old Testament, and looking at actually the problem that mankind has when we walk with the Lord and sinning and failing to meet standards and how that actually acts upon our salvation. Let's turn to Genesis 42. And you'll see here that in these texts, it appears that that there is a loss of salvation because someone didn't do something right. Genesis chapter 42. And verse 21. Speaking about the brothers of Joseph, and they said one to another, "We are verily guilty concerning our brother, in that we saw the anguish of his soul when he besought us, and we would not hear. Therefore is this distress come upon us." Why were the brothers in strife? Because they wouldn't do a certain thing. They heard their brother in the anguish when he besought us, and we would not hear. Here's this phrase that we're going to follow through the Bible. They would not hear. And because of that, some bad things came. But I want to ask you the question, were they lost? Was it a sin what they did? Yes, it was a sin. And it required forgiveness. Deuteronomy 1:25. Now here is another example of Joshua and Caleb after they've had a little bit of time in the wilderness. They come to the borders of the land of Canaan. They give their report. Deuteronomy 1 verse 25. "And they took of the fruit of the land in their hands, and brought it down unto us, and brought us word again, and said, It is a good land which the Lord our God doth give us. Notwithstanding, you would not go up, but rebelled against the commandment of the Lord your God." What was the problem with the children of Israel? They wouldn't go up. Here is, they're not doing something. They are failing. They rebelled against the commandment of the Lord. They would not. They had the fruit in the land. They had God's promises, but they wouldn't do it. Another example in Judges 2 verse 16 and 17. Judges 2. Actually before we go there, let's go to Deuteronomy 8:20. Deuteronomy 8 verse 20. "As the nations which the Lord destroyed before your face, so shall ye perish, because you would not be obedient unto the voice of the Lord your God." Okay, what sort of picture does this draw? You're not obedient, therefore you're going to be destroyed. Is that correct? Sure, that's correct. But can we get a very legalistic view of, if you don't do this, you're finished? And that reflects on how we operate as a church, or how we interact with each other, that if someone doesn't do it, they're lost. Because look at this text. "As the nations which the Lord destroyed before thy face, so shall ye perish, because you would not be obedient unto the voice of the Lord your God." This text is absolutely true, but the human slant that we put on it is that the obedience is some outward action that God is requiring, when the voice of the Lord is more than that. The voice of the Lord is calling us to not just outward action, but actually, "Come unto me, all ye that labour and are heavy laden." And if you would not come unto him, you'll be lost. So would I say, if I ask you the question, if you don't come to Jesus, will you be lost? Amen. Does that sound legalistic? No. But if I said, if you don't have the certain standard in a particular action of yours, you're going to be lost, does that sound legalistic? Both, you can say, are obedience. But one is an obedience to that a sinner can actually do. I've often thought, how do you become obedient when you're disobedient? Do you know there's a way you can be obedient in disobedience? In your disobedience, there's a way you can be obedient. And do you know what that is? Coming back to Jesus. That's how you be obedient. Sure, you've been disobedient. You think, my whole life is disobedient. I've failed in every department. I haven't done this and I haven't done that and I haven't done this. And despair and anguish can crush us. But there's one obedience you can do, and that's just go to Jesus. And that's the obedience where you'll be judged on. Did you go to Jesus? So when we read the text, you would not, as the text in about all these nations being destroyed, because you would not be obedient unto the voice of the Lord. The question is, what is the voice of the Lord? Is it a legalistic requirement where God is just laying down things for us to achieve? Or is the voice of the Lord a standard which the Lord himself has promised to accomplish in us if we come to him? And when we absorb this, it has a profound approach on how we will interact with other people. When someone asks you the question, so if I don't do what your church says, will I be lost? Will I be lost if we talk about defiling the body and how unhealthful practices are wrong, and we could say, that the caffeine in coffee is wrong and it damages the body, and there's heaps of studies to show that is, and so we can say taking caffeine is a transgression against our body, which is the temple of the Holy Ghost, therefore you'll be lost. So people say, are you saying that I'll be lost if I drink coffee? It misses the point entirely. We'll be lost if we don't go to Christ. And if I'm destroying my body and whatever habits I have, because the Bible doesn't tell us not to smoke. The Bible doesn't tell us to not do drugs on so many levels, and yet the world understand, they're wrong. But when we come to Christ, He will correct all the habits that are outside of His line. But the point is coming to Him. If I don't want to come to Him, then that's a different story altogether. Judges chapter 2 and verse 16. Judges 2 and verse 16. Here's another text where it talks about the children of Israel. Judges 2, 16 and 17. Nevertheless, the Lord raised up judges, which delivered them out of the hands of those that spoiled them. And they would not hearken unto their judges, but they went a-whoring after other gods, and bowed themselves unto them. They turned quickly out of the way which their fathers walked in, obeying the commandment of the Lord, but they did not so. Every time we read the Old Testament, we're in danger of reading the Old Testament in a legalistic view. And that comes the sentiment that the Old Testament and New Testament are different dispensations in how salvation actually was accomplished. The way that a New Testament Christian is saved is exactly the same way that someone's saved in the Old Testament. But we have this tendency of reading all these things in a way where, they just didn't listen to God, they went and did the wrong thing, therefore God just took them out. But when we understand how God was communicating to them and what God was amongst them as a shepherd, if a sheep doesn't go to the shepherd, what will happen to the sheep? It will get eaten by a wolf. Is that legalistic? That's just common sense. But the idea that if the sheep doesn't follow the shepherd's going to turn around and smash the sheep in the head, is that legalistic? Sure. There's different ways you can read these texts, but this is the point of what is it that they would not do? Are we in danger of doing the same? Another text in 2 Kings 18 verse 12. Because you obeyed not the voice of the Lord their God, but transgressed his covenant and all that Moses, the servant of thy God, commanded, and would not hear them nor do them. Here was a sentence pronounced against Israel, and the reason why was because Moses, the servant, had commanded all these things and they wouldn't do it. They wouldn't hear it nor do it. If you don't obey, like what the man says, if you can't obey the prophet, you're going to be lost. That is true. But looking at it at a legalistic point of view is not actually the correct representation. What will we do with Jesus is actually the question that we need to always have in our minds. What will we do with Jesus? 2 Chronicles 33 verse 10 and 11. Speaking of the time when the northern tribes were taken by the Assyrian king. And the Lord spake to Manasseh and to his people, but they would not hearken. Wherefore the Lord brought them up upon them the captains of the host of the king of Assyria, which took Manasseh among the thorns, and bound him with fetters, and carried him to Babylon. Why did this happen? They would not hearken. So you can see in these texts in the Old Testament, it is biblical that if we do not have obedience, we will be lost. But the question is, how do we look at this word obedience? Are we looking at, oh yes, all those standards that the church put up and that is expounded from the Bible and from the prophets' writings? If I don't, and it's like a giant wall, a mountain of just requirements on this level and that level, and if I don't do this, I will be lost. That way of thinking needs to shift to a totally different aspect of what obedience actually really is. And so we turn to another string of Bible texts that paint a different picture in the way it's worded. They're actually all saying the same thing, but it's the human background that puts its construction on it. Let's now read some Bible texts that seem to, it actually says the same words, but it spins it in a different aspect, from legalism into actually relationships. And so we turn to our scripture reading, which was in Psalms 81. And now we see a side of God which is benevolent, which is the other side where it seems like, here are these Israelites, Moses told them all this stuff, they didn't do it, he's going to send them to these nations to get killed and burnt, and it's like, wow, God's really tough on these people. But here is, all these scriptures are from the Old Testament also, and we will see this beautiful display of the same problem, but actually how it's painted in Psalms 81 and reading verse 10 through to 12. Psalms 81, 10 through to 12. I am the Lord thy God, which brought thee out of the land of Egypt. Same God in Numbers, in Deuteronomy, in Genesis that we read. I am the Lord thy God, which brought thee out of the land of Egypt, and open thy mouth wide, and I will fill it. What does that sound like? I want to give you blessings. I want to help you out. I want to fulfill my promises to you. But my people would not hearken to me. And Israel would none of me. So I gave them up to their own heart's lusts, and they walked in their own counsels. What picture does this paint? God is wanting to bestow blessings to help them to fulfill the promises that He made to them, and they just wouldn't accept it. Open your mouth so I can fill it with blessing. Oh, they're not opening their mouth. You say to your child's hungry, so I'll feed the child. Okay, dinner time, you get the spoon out and the child never opens its mouth. Is it a mean parent? Is a child not being fed because it's a mean parent? Not at all. But if the parent says, I'm only going to feed you if you mop the floor first, and if the child never mops the floor, I'm not feeding you, and the child starves to death, is it a mean parent? But the child has, in both cases, one is the child's just not opening the mouth. The parent says, open your mouth, and the child won't do it. Both scenarios, one where the child isn't doing its chore to get its food, the second one where the child won't respond to receive the blessing, both are disobedience. Do you get the picture? Both are disobedience. But one is the fault lies perfectly on the child, and the parent can't do anything about it. The other one is the legalistic requirements of the parent. How do you look at the Old Testament? My people would not hearken. That was the problem, all the other texts before. You would not hearken, so the Assyrians came in and smashed your cities. You would not hearken, so you were carried to Babylon. You would not hearken, so this problem came to you. As if God is like this avenging God that just hits down everyone that just doesn't listen to him. That's not God. God is saying, open your mouth so I can bless you, but you wouldn't do it. If you don't get a blessing, you get a curse. If you don't get life, you'll get death. It's not God's problem that we always blame God. Why God this? Why God that? Why does God do this? It's not God's problem. God is simply saying, open your mouth and just let me. But you wouldn't do it. He's not asking us to live a perfect life. He's saying, come to me and I will make you live a perfect life. And you wouldn't come. Isaiah 28. Let's look at another text in the Old Testament, Isaiah 28 and verse 9 through to 12. Isaiah 28, 9 through to 12. Whom shall he teach knowledge? And whom shall he make to understand doctrine? Them that are weaned from the milk and drawn from the breasts. What sort of relationship is this bringing to our mind? A parental relationship of a loving parent to the child. I will feed you, I will do these things. Here he says, for precept must be upon precept, and precept upon precept, line upon line upon line, here a little and there a little. For with a stammering lip and another tongue will he speak to his people. To whom he said, this is the rest, wherewith you may cause the weary to rest, and this is the refreshing. Yet they would not hear. What's the problem with Israel again? I want to give you rest. I want to bless you with a day of rest that is a sign of the rest of the gospel that we are to enjoy every day of the week. I want to bless you with this, but you would not. The people who will not will be lost. And so the question that was asked me, if someone doesn't keep the Sabbath holy, are they lost? It's a totally wrong way to actually pose, to come to the question, to come to the issue. The question is, if God is blessing us and wanting to give us a blessing and we don't want to receive that blessing, you answer the question yourself. Everyone knows the answer. Isaiah 30, verse 15 and 16. Another one. Paints another picture, uses the same words. They would not hearken, they would not do it. Isaiah 30 and verse 15 and 16. For thus saith the Lord God, the Holy One of Israel, in returning and rest shall ye be saved. How are you saved? In returning. What does returning say? What comes to your mind when you hear this word return? It means you're backslidden. You've gone the wrong way. You've fallen into a pit, and God is saying, come back to me. Maybe you've got a wrong picture of God and think He's a God that is a tyrant. You've gone the wrong way. It's not me. Come unto me, He's saying. In returning and rest shall ye be saved. In quietness and in confidence shall be your strength. And you would not. You wouldn't do it. This is the God of the Old Testament. It's Jesus. When He was at the city, He's wanting Jerusalem to accept Him as the Messiah. He wasn't asking them to all have perfection then and there. He wanted them to receive Him, and He could help them. And He was so sorry because they just wouldn't receive Him. The sick man that never takes the medicine, what hope is there? Is it a legalistic loss because you didn't take the medicine, you're lost? Or is it's just the method of salvation that you're not accepting? There is no other option. And Christ cried over Jerusalem. He said, how many times I would gather you under my wings like a chicken gathers the little chicks under the wing. But you wouldn't. You wouldn't do it. Jeremiah 13. Jeremiah 13, verse 11. It's all through the scriptures, this whole approach to disobedience. The disobedience was just not coming to Christ, not returning back to Him. Jeremiah 13 and verse 11. Jeremiah 13 and verse 11. For as the girdle cleaveth to the loins of a man, so have I caused to cleave unto me the whole house of Israel, and the whole house of Judah, saith the Lord, that they might be unto me for a people, and for a name, and for a praise, and for a glory. But they would not hear. See the problem? I want to make these people into something special. I want to develop their characters. I want to make them a jewel that shines. Sure, they're not. They're sinners. They're a poor people. Out of all the nations, the Israelites were in bondage in Egypt, and they were actually a very poor people. And God chose them and says, I'm going to work with them. He's not trying to pick the qualified people. He wants sinners. That's the qualification. To be qualified, to be worthy, to be a friend of Jesus means you need to be a sinner. Are you that? Yes or no? So then you go to Him. And the only reason you'll ever fail is because you didn't go to Him, that's all. All the actions of our life that we do, that we fall into, all habits and all these things, they're all side issues actually. Because they all can be overcome through the grace of Christ if the person goes. And if they still exist, because we will be judged according to our works, we will be judged because of what we have done or not done, but the judgment will hinge not so much on just mere the fact that it was done, that you rejected the means for it not to be done, or for it to be done, whichever it is. And that has a fearful penalty. I want to make this beautiful text. Let's read it again. Verse 11. As the girdle cleaveth to the loins of a man. If you're ever wearing a belt, keeps everything together. As that belt is strapped around you, so have I caused to cleave unto me the whole house of Israel and the whole house of Judah, saith the Lord, that they might be unto me for a people, and for a name, and for a praise, and for a glory. But they would not hear. Let's turn to Matthew chapter 11, verse 16 to 17. Matthew chapter 11, beautiful text here. Not sure how many people would have read this one or considered it. Let's turn there. Matthew 11 and verse 17, 16, 17. 16 and 17, Matthew 11. But whereunto shall I liken this generation? It is likened unto children sitting in the markets and calling unto their fellows and saying, We have piped unto you, and you have not danced. We have mourned unto you, and you have not lamented. How does Christ liken the generation? We played the tune, you never danced. You didn't respond to that calling. Here Christ is calling. The call is a power in itself. If I be lifted up, I will draw all men unto me. Everyone. Does that mean everyone will actually come to Christ? They'll have the drawing, but they won't respond. How will I liken this generation? We played the tune, we piped, you didn't dance. You didn't respond to this overtures of love, to a relationship that will make you overcome all your problems. You didn't respond to that. And so Christ gives this example of this generation in verse 17, saying, We have piped and you have not unto you and you have not danced. And then in the same chapter, in verse 28, he makes this musical noise, so to speak, this symbolic piping in the marketplace. Come unto me, all ye that labour and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly of heart, and ye shall find rest unto your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. That's the call. All through the Old Testament, this call was the same. Come unto me, Israel. I will help you against all your problems. Just listen to my voice of love. But no, people read it as a legalistic requirement. If you don't, make this sacrifice in this particular form, you're finished. The reason why they couldn't obey is because they couldn't come to Christ. Or they didn't come to Christ. Therefore, you can't obey. But with Christ, how many things are possible? Tell me that. Do you believe that? All is all. Not a problem you can think of that's not solvable with Christ. The only thing that will make it unsolvable is if you don't come to Christ. Because with men, it's impossible. John chapter 12 and verse 38 through to 40. John chapter 12. John chapter 12, verse 38 through to 40. That the saying of Isaiah, the prophet, might be fulfilled, which he spake, Lord, who hath believed our report? And to whom hath the arm of the Lord been revealed? Therefore they could not believe, because that Isaiah said again, He hath blinded their eyes and hardened their heart, that they should not see with their eyes, nor understand with their heart, and be converted, that I should heal them. What was equated with blinding of the eyes was the hardening of the hearts. When our hearts are hardened, we will hear Christ's invitation, won't respond to it. And if we don't respond to Christ, then that is really a sin unto death. Did Satan respond to Christ? Did Christ want Satan saved? Want him to reconsider his position before he left heaven? Of course he did. But did Lucifer respond? No response. Did Christ make a call to Cain? How did he do it? He said, if you do well, it will be okay. The well wasn't live a perfect life and you won't have a problem. If you follow the sacrifices, not making your own program, if you just follow the conditions of the slain lamb, which represents me, if you will take me and my offering, things will work out for you, Cain. And what did Cain say? It's too hard for me to bear. I don't want your yoke. It's too hard for me. And so he left. He received a mark. So the whole world will fall into the two categories. One will have the mark of man, which rejects the mark of the beast, which rejects the calling of Christ. And the others will receive the seal of God, which is responding to this call of Christ, that follow the Lamb whithersoever he goeth. It's a relationship of following God, not following a whole list of requirements dangled from the pulpit, or some people say, oh, this is the checklist of religious things that you must tick off, and when you've done it, you're a holy person. Far from it. It's following Jesus wherever he goes. And where Jesus will go is in a place that will purify you in your particular circumstances in his way. Jesus did that with King David. Even to the point where King David did apparently the wrong thing. He ate the showbread. But what did Christ say about that? He was guiltless. Why? He was following the Lamb whereversoever he went. And so where a legalistic man will jump on David and say, this is the letter requirement and this and this and this. David had a relationship with Jesus that purified him from all his wrongs that he had committed in the past. And no one could judge him for it. The text says, who is he that condemneth? Yea, it is Christ that justifieth and is risen again. Who can condemn if you've got a relationship with Christ? The question is, do you really have a relationship with Christ? That's what you've got to ask yourself, because that is the point where we will really be judged on. What did you do with Jesus? Will be the question. Christ's invitation all the time is not a driving approach where it's pushing us to go and do this and do that. The hireling will push the sheep. Christ is a shepherd. He calls. I stand at the door and knock. He's not barging in and just laying down the legalistic rules. He's knocking at the heart's door. If any man will open, Revelation 22 verse 17. This is a call. Revelation 22 verse 17. Come unto me, all ye that labour and are heavy laden, is what we read in Matthew 11. The invitation where the marriage supper's on. Go and invite people to come. He wants to draw us to him. Revelation 22 verse 17. And the Spirit and the bride say, come. And let him that heareth say, come. And let him that is athirst come. And whosoever will. Whosoever will, let him take of the water of life freely. Whosoever will. That's a promise that empowers our will to come to Jesus. Right there. And so if we think, I can't come to Jesus, the promise empowers us to come to Jesus. Whosoever will, let him come. That's what Christ is saying. And if I don't come, what's Christ going to say? They would not come. They would not. This is the rest where you'll be refreshed, and in returning in a rest you'll be saved. But You would not. And Ellen White says, if you will not, you cannot. We create the impossibility ourselves. I want to just conclude with one statement from Ellen White in the book Our Father Cares. Our Father Cares, page 97. Some regard sin as altogether so light a matter that they have no defence against its indulgence or its consequence. If you suppose for a moment that God will treat sin lightly, or make provisions or exemptions so that you can go on committing sin, and the soul suffer no penalty for so doing, you are under a terrible delusion of Satan. What does God think of sin? He hates it. He's made a way of escape from it. And He requires you to accept that invitation. That's what He wants you to do. He doesn't treat sin lightly. This message isn't to say, me not doing a certain thing doesn't really matter. It does actually matter. But your biggest issue, if we fail, our biggest issue will be, what did you do with Jesus? Because that was your solution to the problem. Sin is not a light matter. It shouldn't be treated lightly. But let's not go down the legalistic side in looking at it as an act compared to a relationship, as a solution. Any willful violation of the righteous law of Jehovah exposes your soul to the full assaults of Satan. When you lose your conscious integrity, your soul becomes a battlefield for Satan. You have doubts and fears enough to paralyze your energies and drive you to discouragement. Remember that temptation is not sin. Remember that however trying the circumstances in which a man may be placed, nothing can really weaken his soul as long as he does not yield to temptation but maintains his own integrity. The interests most vital to you individually are in your own keeping. In your own keeping. And what is that? Whether you'll come to Christ. Because all the way through the Bible, they would not. They would not. They would not. Your ruin can never take place until your will consents. If there is no pollution of mind in yourself, all the surrounding pollutions cannot taint or defile you. Eternal life is worth everything to us, or it is worth nothing. Those only who put forth persevering effort and untiring zeal with intense desire, proportionate to the value of the object they are in pursuit of, will gain the life which measures with the life of God. We have an example of Adam and Eve before us, and the result of their transgression should lead every soul of us to avoid sin, to abhor sin as hateful thing it is, and to feel in view of the sufferings which sin is sure to inflict, that it is better to suffer loss of all things than to depart from the least of God's commandments. And then the next page says, many who hear this invitation, come unto me, all ye that labour and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Many who hear this invitation while sighing for rest, yet press on the rugged path, hugging their burdens close to their heart. Jesus loves them and longs to bear their burdens, and themselves also in his strong arms. He would remove the fears and uncertainties that rob them of peace and trust. But they must first come to him and tell him the secret woes of their heart. Sometimes we pour our troubles into human ears and tell our afflictions to those who cannot help us, and neglect to confide all to Jesus, who is able to change the sorrow way to paths of joy and peace. He purposes to be our friend, to walk with us through all the rough pathways of life. He says to us, I am the Lord thy God, walk with me, and I will fill thy paths with light. Jesus, the majesty of heaven, proposes to elevate to companionship with him those who come to him with their burdens, their weaknesses, and their cares. His invitation to us is a call to a pure, holy, and happy life, a life of peace and rest, of liberty and love, and to a rich inheritance in the future immortal life. It is our privilege to have daily a calm, close, happy walk with Jesus. Rest is found when all self-justification, all reasoning from a selfish standpoint is put away. Entire self-surrender and acceptance of his ways is the secret of perfect rest in his love. Do just what he has told you to do, and be assured that God will do all that he has said he would do. You think of the promises when it comes to overcoming habits and actions. How much has God said he would do? Think of that. And you must do what he has said for you to do. And what is the first thing he says for you to do? Come to me. All your burdens and everything. Come to me. If we can do that, he has promised that he will do everything he has said he will do. That is not legalistic. Yet it maintains a high standard. But in the framework of the gospel. Do just what he has told you to do, and be assured that God will do all that he has said he would do. Have you come to him, renouncing all your makeshifts, all your unbelief, all your self-righteousness? Come just as you are, weak, helpless, and ready to die. What is the rest promised? It is the consciousness that God is true, that he never disappoints the one who comes to him. His pardon is full and free, and his acceptance means rest to the soul, rest in his love. May the Lord help us to, when we sin the sin that men commit. You look at all the examples in the Bible, they're hideous sins. But Christ is offering us life. Let's not get onto the side of the devil where we actually reject Christ himself. Can't even pray for people who do that. Not that we should judge whether people have done that or not. That's not our job. But our work is that we would not be one of those that Christ would say, the Father will say, what happened to such and such a brother or sister? Christ would say, they wouldn't come. I called them. I sent out servants to call them. I called them and I called them and I called them. They still wouldn't come. It's the only reason for failure. We wouldn't. So I hope you can get an appreciation of that negative part to those lovely texts. I've often wondered, why is it lovely text, in peace you'll be... But they would not. It's a warning for us. God did put it there for a reason. Not to be negative for negative's sake, but to be real, because that's what life's about. So I pray that we can accept Christ and come to him with our heart and all our problems, and accept the invitation and accept his gracious promises. Amen.